For 40 years, Claire believed she was building a life with Robert. It was a simple life, tucked away in a quiet countryside home they had built together. The trees in the yard, they planted those as saplings. Their 2 sons, they raised them within these walls. It wasn't a mansion, no, but it was theirs. Every single brick seemed to hold a memory, and every sunrise that spilled over their porch was a gentle reminder of a love she thought was forever. But love, like all things, can change. Lately, Robert had become a different man. He was distant, his eyes always searching for something on the horizon, something he couldn't seem to name. He was restless, like a man trapped in a life he no longer wanted. Then, Claire's health began to fail. Her heart, once so full of love, grew weak. The doctors were firm. She needed surgery, and soon. Robert held her hand, looked into her eyes, and promised he would be right there by her side when she woke up. But promises, she would soon learn, can break just as easily as hearts. The night before her operation, he leaned down and kissed her forehead. It felt different. It was cold, practiced, almost like a final goodbye. And when she finally opened her eyes days later, hazy from the anesthesia, the chair beside her bed was empty. Robert wasn't there. A nurse, with a look of pity in her eyes, handed her a thick envelope. On the front, in Robert's familiar scrawl, were the words, "Urgent property documents." When Claire was finally discharged and made her way home, her heart ached with confusion and a growing sense of dread. As the taxi pulled up to her house, she saw them. Strangers. A young couple was in her garden, laughing and planning where to put new flower beds. Her house, the home she had poured her soul into for 4 decades, was sold. The truth hit her like a physical blow. Her husband had not only left her, but he had taken everything. He had emptied their joint bank account and simply vanished. Her legs gave way and she collapsed onto the front steps, her hands digging into the familiar soil, the scent of her rose bush filling the air as tears streamed down her face. She was utterly and completely alone. For days, she existed in a haze of grief, adrift in a small, sterile, rented room. Her heart was a battleground, torn between a burning rage and a deep, crushing sorrow. To distract herself, she began sorting through old boxes of documents, relics of a life that felt like a dream. As she sifted through dusty files, her fingers traced over faded ink until one line, a forgotten detail from decades ago, leaped out at her. It was from the original deed for their land. The land the house was built on. It had never been officially transferred into Robert's name. It still legally belonged to her late father's estate, and by extension to her. Her heart stopped, but this time it wasn't from pain. It was a jolt of pure, unadulterated possibility. With newfound purpose, Claire reached out to an old family friend, a retired lawyer who had handled her father's estate all those years ago. She laid out the papers on his mahogany desk, her hands trembling slightly. As he reviewed the documents, a slow smile spread across his face. Together, they began to unravel the intricate legal trap that Robert, in his greed and arrogance, had unwittingly walked straight into. If the land wasn't his to sell, then the sale of the house built upon it wasn't legally valid. The new owners, the couple in her garden, had no idea. Robert had no idea. But soon, very soon, they were all about to find out. She wasn't just a victim anymore. She was a woman with a plan. 3 months passed. Claire, guided by her lawyer friend, moved with quiet determination. She filed motions, signed affidavits, and sent certified letters. She was reclaiming her life, one legal document at a time. Then, one sunny afternoon, he returned. Robert pulled up to the house, looking confident and smug in his expensive new clothes, laughing into his phone. He had come to gloat, to see the broken woman he had left behind. But the woman he was about to find was anything but broken. As he swaggered up the driveway, his laughter died in his throat. Pinned to the front gate was an official court notice. In bold letters, it read, "Illegal occupation property seized." And standing there, just beyond the gate, was Claire. She stood beside a uniformed officer, silent, her posture straight, her gaze unwavering. She was strong. Robert's world imploded. He screamed, he begged. He cursed her name, the law, the world. But the law is indifferent to broken vows and crocodile tears. His con had unraveled completely. The house, the money he'd stolen, his shiny new reputation had all vanished, seized as evidence in the fraud case against him. He was left with absolutely nothing but the crushing weight of his own regret and the echoing memory of the woman he had so foolishly underestimated. He had thought he was taking her future, but he had only managed to destroy his own. Claire never remarried. She didn't need to. She moved back into that same old house, her house. She planted new flowers, brighter ones this time, and filled the quiet rooms not with loneliness, but with a profound and lasting peace. Every evening she would sit on her porch, a warm cup of tea in her hands, and watch the sun dip below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and gold. Sometimes she'd whisper to the setting sun a secret just for herself, not revenge. Just justice. Her life wasn't about him anymore. It was about her. Every story we hear holds a hidden truth. Some teach us about pain, while others teach us about the incredible strength we hold within ourselves. If Claire's story of resilience and justice resonated with you, please share it. You never know who might need to be reminded of their own strength today. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories that will truly move your heart. For 43 years, Margaret and Henry shared everything: a home, dreams, laughter, even the silence between arguments. But one morning, over a simple cup of coffee, Henry uttered the words that would shatter her world into a million pieces. "I'm leaving, Margaret. I've found someone else." He couldn't even bring himself to look her in the eye as he said it. In that moment, the entire world seemed to freeze. The man she had built a life with stood up, his suitcase already packed, a stark symbol of his betrayal. She just sat there frozen, her hands trembling so much that hot coffee spilled from her cup, scalding her, but she barely felt it. The house that once echoed with warmth and laughter turned cold and silent overnight. His voice was gone, his clothes had vanished from the closet, but his scent lingered like a ghost she couldn't chase away. It was in the armchair he always sat in, on the pillow next to hers, a constant, cruel reminder of what she had lost. For weeks, Margaret did nothing but cry. The tears fell silently in the lonely quiet of her room, a private mourning for a life that had been stolen from her. Then, one day, exhausted from grief, she looked into the mirror at her own reflection. She saw the lines of age, the silver in her hair, and the deep sadness in her eyes. It was then that a new thought took root. She whispered to the woman staring back at her, "He left me for youth, but I have something he'll never have: wisdom." Months later, the final blow came in the mail. It was a wedding announcement. Henry had married the young woman, a waitress half his age. The card informed her they'd moved into a beautiful new house, a house Henry had purchased with the money from their joint savings account. The rage she expected to feel never came. She didn't scream. She didn't throw things. She didn't plot a loud, messy fight. Instead, a slow, quiet smile spread across her face. Because Margaret had a secret. A secret that Henry, in his haste and arrogance, had completely forgotten. She still owned the land lease under that brand new house. In his rush to start his new life, he had built his future on ground that still belonged to her past. 6 months after that, Margaret sat down at her antique writing desk and penned a letter in her elegant, flowing script. "Dear Henry," it began, "it's been a long time. I'd like to see you once more before life decides otherwise. Come for dinner." Just one evening. When Henry received the letter, he laughed out loud. He turned to his new young wife and said, "Poor old thing. She's finally accepted it. She probably just wants closure." But beneath his mockery, a spark of curiosity flickered. He wanted to see her, to confirm his victory, to see how she was coping without him, so he agreed to go. He couldn't resist the chance to witness her defeat firsthand. When Henry and his wife arrived at the old house, they were surprised. The place wasn't sad or neglected. It was warm and inviting. Margaret had lit candles, and the smell of his favorite meal roast chicken with thyme filled the air. She greeted them with a calm, soft smile, her composure unsettling them both. They ate in an awkward, heavy silence, the clinking of their silverware the only sound in the room. Finally, after clearing the main course plates, Margaret broke the tension. She looked directly at Henry, her eyes clear and steady. "You built your new life on my foundation," she said, her voice even. "Literally," Henry frowned, completely bewildered. "What are you talking about, Margaret?" His new wife just looked back and forth between them, a confused expression on her face. With a graceful movement, Margaret slid a thick brown envelope across the polished dining table. It stopped right in front of Henry, His hands trembled slightly as he picked it up. Inside were legal papers, official documents. The original land lease for the plot his new dream home was sitting on. "You forgot, Henry," Margaret said softly. "The land your new house is on, it's still under my name. It was my inheritance, remember? You've been paying me rent for the past 6 months." The color drained from Henry's face. He looked as if he'd seen a ghost. Beside him, his young wife's fork clattered onto her plate as she let out a small, sharp gasp, her hand flying to his arm. But Margaret just smiled gently. There was no triumph in her eyes, only a quiet finality. "Don't worry," she said, her voice soothing. "I'm not cruel. You can keep the house. You can keep the land." Henry looked up, his expression a mixture of shock and disbelief. "I just wanted you to remember," she continued, "that everything you build on a foundation of broken trust eventually cracks." With those words, she stood up from the table. She leaned over, and in a gesture of unbelievable grace, she kissed him softly on the forehead, a final poignant farewell. Then she turned and walked out of the dining room, out of the house, and into the night, disappearing into the darkness without a single glance back. Years passed. Margaret moved to a small, charming cottage by the sea. She lived a quiet, contented life with her cat, and a garden bursting with daisies. She found a piece she hadn't realized she was missing. Then one afternoon, a letter arrived. The handwriting was shaky, but she recognized it instantly. It was from Henry. It was short, only a few lines. "You were right," it read. "The cracks showed. I lost everything. I hope you found peace." Margaret looked out at the ocean, a faint, knowing smile on her lips. She folded the letter and whispered to the sea breeze, "I already had it." Some revenge stories are loud and explosive. Others are quiet, graceful, and completely unforgettable. If Margaret's story touched your heart, please like and share this video. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more emotional life stories that will stay with you long after they end. Thanks for watching. Thomas Reynolds spent 40 years building his dream Reynolds hardware, the pride of his small town. He'd started with just one shelf, one hammer, and a single promise to himself, to leave something truly meaningful behind for his family. But dreams, like people, can be twisted by greed. It was a beautiful journey, from a small shop in the 1980s full of hope to a modern store glowing under neon lights. There were photos of him and his teenage son, Daniel, working side by side, their faces bright with laughter. It was more than a business, it was a legacy in the making. When Thomas turned 68, he felt it was time to pass the torch. He trusted his son to carry on the family name with pride. But Daniel, ambitious and impatient, had other plans. He called a board meeting, a formal, cold affair that felt alien in their family-run business. In front of employees who had known Thomas for decades, who were like family, Daniel stood up and spoke words that cut deeper than any blade. "Dad," he said, his voice void of warmth, "it's time for you to retire. You're slowing us down." The room fell silent. Thomas felt the air leave his lungs. He looked at his son, the boy he had taught to hold his first hammer. "I built this company with my hands, son," he managed to say, his voice thick with disbelief. Daniel just smirked, a chilling, unfamiliar expression on his face. "And I'm building it for the future," he replied. "Without you." The betrayal was absolute. Thomas, with a dignity that defied the crushing weight of his heartbreak, stood up and walked out of the room, leaving his life's work behind him. That night, Thomas sat alone in his office, the rain outside mirroring the storm in his heart. This was the same office where his wife once brought him lunch, the same floor where his kids had done their homework while he worked late. But now, the walls felt like they were closing in, filled not with pride, but with the suffocating presence of betrayal. He looked at the photos on his shelves, memories of a happier time. With trembling hands, he picked up the golden nameplate from his desk. It read, "Thomas Reynolds, Founder." He whispered to the empty room, "You can take the business, son, but you can't take my name." For months, an unsettling silence followed. Thomas retreated from the world, walking alone in the park, a solitary figure feeding birds. He saw the newspaper headlines. Reynolds Hardware expands, new CEO leads change. Daniel was moving fast, changing the branding, replacing old staff, and stripping away the very culture his father had so carefully built. Customers in town whispered that the old man was finished, that he had been cast aside and forgotten. But what no one knew What no one could see behind his quiet exterior was that Thomas wasn't defeated. He was waiting, he was thinking. Then, one ordinary afternoon, the phone rang. It was the town registrar's office calling about an annual property tax renewal. It was a routine call, one he'd received for 40 years. The clerk mentioned his name in connection with the property. A spark ignited in Thomas's mind. He asked faintly, "Wait, the property is still under my name?" The clerk, unaware of the drama that had unfolded, replied cheerfully, "Yes, sir. The business registration may have changed, but the deed for the building and the land is still in your name. It always has been." For the first time in months, a slow smile spread across Thomas's face, followed by a soft, low laugh. It was a sound of quiet thunder, of revelation. The business might be his son's, but the building, the very foundation it stood on, was his. He hung up the phone, his mind clear and his path forward illuminated. "Well," he said to himself, "then it's time he pays the rent." A few days later, Thomas walked back into the store. He moved with a calm, composed confidence, as if he'd never left. The new employees didn't recognize him. He found Daniel in a meeting with a group of serious-looking investors, discussing expansion plans. Thomas walked straight to the conference table and placed a sealed envelope in front of his son. The room went quiet. "What's this?" Daniel asked, annoyed by the interruption. Thomas looked him straight in the eye, his voice steady and firm. "That's a formal eviction notice. You have 60 days to vacate my property." Daniel's face turned a shade of crimson. He jumped to his feet, his composure shattering. "You can't do this. This is my company," he shouted, slamming his fist on the table. The investors looked on, stunned. Thomas didn't flinch. "You took my business, son," he said calmly. "I'm just taking back my walls." And with that, he turned and walked away, the bright light from the doorway framing his departure as he left his son to face the consequences of his own actions. The fallout was swift and brutal. Without the flagship store location, the heart of the company, Daniel's investors pulled out. The loans were called in. The empire Daniel had tried to build on a foundation of betrayal crumbled into dust. Within months, the sign for Reynolds Hardware was taken down, the doors locked for good. The business went to auction. And who was there, sitting quietly in the front row? Thomas Reynolds. Calmly, patiently, he bought back the inventory piece by piece, shelf by shelf. He reclaimed every nut, every bolt, every tool that carried a memory, until everything Daniel had taken was his once more. Daniel watched from a distance, a broken figure consumed by regret, as his father methodically reclaimed his legacy. 6 months later, a brand new sign hung over the very same building. It read, "Reynolds Tools and Trust, founded by Thomas Reynolds." The community celebrated his return. The store wasn't just a business. It was the heart of the town, and its rightful owner was back. One quiet evening, after the grand reopening, Daniel came to the store. He stood before his father, the weight of his failure heavy on his shoulders. There were no accusations, no angry words. Thomas simply looked at his son, then handed him a hammer, just like he had done all those years ago. "Start again, son," he said, his voice filled with the profound grace. "This time build something worth your name. Some legacies can't be stolen because they're built on more than money. They're built on heart, on trust, and on character." If Thomas's story touched you, subscribe to our channel. We believe that dignity always finds its way home. Thanks for watching.